Looks like it's just about time to go. So let me make a quick introduction. Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending tonight's session. It's going to be really interesting to hear about the updates to the Pmbok and some of the transformation that's going on at PMI. Wanted to let everybody know that this session is a PDU session. And if you wish, we will go ahead and file your PDUs for you. So if you would go to this link, which I'm putting in the chat, and take this brief survey. If you're a PMI credential holder, we'll go ahead and submit PDUs for you, and they will immediately be applied to your PMI, what do we call it, transcript, your online transcript. So if you do that within 24 hours, we will go ahead and automatically submit those for you. Dave Davies is tonight's presenter, and Dave is a very experienced and long-time committed volunteer with PMI, and one of my co-instructors at Project Management Gorillas. So Dave, why don't you go ahead and take us on through tonight's agenda and topics. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andy, and welcome everybody. And this is interactive, etc. You can type questions in the chat. Odds are good. I won't catch them immediately because sometimes I get into the presentation, or quite frankly, I think we can, even be in mode, we can unmute and just ask the question. And then again, welcome. I'm going to talk about the whole PMI, and I use the term standards family, Pmbok7, because this is a significant change in many ways. And I'm going to start this presentation. I'm going to be framing kind of where I'll say the whole environment is, and then start looking at some of the different components of this family that we talk about, because there's really going to be three major chunks of the Pmbok, as we usually call it going forward. By the way, Pmbok guide is the official term. I've seen people get some higher blood pressure. Somebody says just the word Pmbok without Pmbok guide, but it's a PMI knowledge in general. I mean, it's a massive knowledge store of data at PMI, and they're trying to organize it in a couple of ways, including supporting standards, ANSI standards, which this does, and ISO standards, and to be able to do a certification exam with credibility. So some of those factors do drive some of this structure, but it's really more ancillary than the primary factor. So let's get in, and I'll start with kind of general idea. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the standard or with the Standish group, but they're considered a think tank, I'll say mainly in software development delivery, but they're pretty big, and they're a think tank in transformation in general, and et cetera. And they've published a document Jim Johnson was actually the person who did this, called Chaos 2020 and Beyond Infinity. And they kind of build it off of a concept that there's significant change every 20 years. And they go back a little bit to kind of the evolution period of just software development in general. And what's kind of strange is software development from a historical perspective hasn't been around that long. I mean, it's they take it back to somewhere in the year 1960, because that's when we started getting some scale and a few other things. Long before the PC and some other things, I think IBM was still saying that there's no need for more than 20 computers in the world or whatever that urban folklore / statement is. But it was kind of a wild, wild west as far as development. Now, there were some significant pieces happening there. And I'll say NASA is one to use as a good example, because NASA was rocket science, and they had a pretty defined, objective: get a man to the moon and back alive by the end of the decade. And so they were really starting to build tools in that at that point in time. And that carried on for a while. And actually, even in this time frame in 1960 to 1980 is when PMI started, and we started to create standards books. And we started to bring this around to a discipline. And it really gained enough scale or order of magnitude that in the 1980, and Sanders uses the term the waterfall period. I like to think of it more as a significant upfront planning period. When we got there, we felt that we were smart enough to be able to outline every task to a very low level of delivery to be able to get an idea of what all the dependencies were across the entire project. And that built in with it a lot of definitive planning, structure, dependencies, relationships, and software in and of the whole was starting to become very prevalent. PCs were starting to show up on people's desktops. Tools were starting to be involving. Standards came about from PMI. Tools started to mature and really get some rules around them and general accepted usage. And it really brought a lot of maturity to the whole concept of project management as a science. And by as a science, that means that there's a set of rules and other principles that can guide the most efficient way in order to deliver projects. And we started to get a lot of things built around that. And about the same time, towards the end of it, that 20-year period, a group of developers got together and wrote something called the Agile Manifesto. And that really introduced another era. And that was called, the Agile period, which for the Standish group, that's kind of coming to a close right at the moment. But some big characteristics of that era was not as extensive in upfront planning, but more focused on a product development and delivery feedback instead of heavy documentation. A lot of things that basically was very critical of the overhead that traditional waterfall project management had brought in, and then they wanted to focus more on the product, the deliverable, the team. And one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto is that working product is much more effective than comprehensive documentation. So we started to get into this mode of making small teams to deliver features and have different ways to define features. And with the Scrum, we brought in certain, quote, ceremonies, unquote. And we started to do sort of a mixture between some structured methodology and a little bit more free-form, team-controlled, self-governing teams for delivering that. And that huge impact. I don't think there's a person on this call who hasn't heard of Scrum or of Agile methodologies or anything like that. And then we got to the point where, hey, this Scrum's kind of working for small teams, but how do we scale it across the organization? And actually, that's starting to show some of the foundational stress factors, for lack of a better term, within the whole Scrum mentality. And that's where the Standish group is saying, okay, maybe the Agile period kind of riding off into the sunset, because it's had its lifespan, it's done some good things, but the needs have now outpaced the advantages. And so the standards group uses the term infinite flow. And I'm not going to spend much time on this. I'm just setting this up as to where Pmbok Guide 7 fits in. But by infinite flow, that's really getting away from a lot of, quote, cycles, unquote, budget cycles, development cycles, some of that. We're going to be more and more product focused or value focused. That may be, part of it may be product, part of it may be organizational change. It may be a combination of both. It may be compliance issues. It's really not going to matter, because continuous flow is going to look at all these different pieces and delivering them continuously and not necessarily bundled together as part of a huge project. So PMI realizes that things are changing, and how can we make sure that our standards, which is a global standard, and PMI is still the most proficient organization in the world to handle project management standards, principles, ideas, et cetera, and how can we adapt to it? And every couple of years, PMI delivers a new version of the Pmbok guide. And as we were coming up in the latest one, in the 7.0, these environmental factors we're taking into consideration. Briefly, I kind of want to give you a timeline of Pmboks in general. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I don't know if any of you remember the first one. This is actually in the time frame which I got my PMP exam. And really the first Pmbok guide wasn't even a guide. It was kind of notes, for lack of a better term, and thoughts and ideas. There were some white papers, but there were things in there such as we met as a team and talked about these things. So that was the start of the Pmbok guide in 1996 is when it first came out in paper. And then as we follow this, I'm not going to read year by year, but it matured in several ways, matured in the content, matured in what the different knowledge areas were. They've actually expanded twice. There were 8 knowledge areas, and now there's 10. Actually, when I took the PMP exam in 1990, late 1990s, there were, say, 8 different exams for each of the knowledge areas, and you had to score a certain percentage in each of the 8. And we had to take a hammer and chisel in our answers into a slate tab and pass it off in the email, or not even email, snail mail to go in. But during all that, it started evolving, and that brought along with it several things. One, there was a lot of legacy things that needed to be addressed. 2, how do you retire some things? And 3, how do you address the changing world? So every couple of years, and 4 or 5 was the benchmark here, it evolved. There was edition 4. I think 4 is the one that brought in a couple concepts such as integration. And we started seeing a term in 5 called tailoring, which was the official acknowledgement that our framework doesn't fit everything, that each organization can, quote, tailor it to meet that. And then Pmbok 6, rather than include in Pmbok, there was an Agile companion guide that came about. So now as we're getting into 7, which is 2021, encompassing all these changes, the embedded information is important. Also, a criticism PMI had as they went through this evolution is the Pmbok guide, the number of sheets of paper increased exponentially. And they got at the point that, here was even 2 books. So how many trees are you killing type mindset sort of evolved. And so that's been addressed here too. And we'll talk about that as we go forward. But the first and foremost I want to talk about on this is kind of it being a gateway to a new era. We're still going to have the Pmbok guide, and it's still going to be the standard for project management, but that's just going to be a part of it. Within the standard, there's going to be 2 major components. One is the value delivery system, and another are project delivery principles. By the way, I'm going to talk about all these towards the end. This is kind of like here's what I'm going to tell you. But if we look at one part as the standard, it's really going away from what was traditionally knowledge areas, and we're looking at principles. And principles are just kind of our mentality. You can almost say they're ethics, but how we're going to approach things. And, we're going to be good stewards of the resources we're that are endowed to us. And we've always had that there, but we've never focused on the principles as being a key component. And within the new standard, that's going to have to. And also we're going to be focused on, and you'll see this term throughout, value delivery. And that's been around a while, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in everything we do. What is the value? Then there's going to be the Pmbok guide moving forward, and that's going to change significantly. And by the way, this is changing in lockstep with the whole PMP exam. Actually, the PMP exam changed January 1st of this year. Major change there. And I'll say briefly, the biggest change was it went to like 50% agile, 50% more traditional. PMI actually uses the term predictive, not waterfall. The market uses waterfall or software development life cycle. It really doesn't matter. I think it's kind of like more upfront planning and well-defined tasks as opposed to more iterative and continuous improvement and development. So the Pmbok guide, now that's the framework for applying the standard. So the standards, how we do this stuff, these are our principles, and then here's how we're going to apply them. And they are heavily into this term tailoring. You know, the concept that each organization is going to tailor their specific processes, their specific way of doing work around these principles and within a series of what's going to be known as performance domains. And that's where these models, methods, and artifacts come in. And these are some of the things that we've had in the past. Knowledge areas, artifacts are going to talk about charters. It's going to talk about work breakdown structures. It's going to talk about registers, a risk mitigation plan. Artifact being some man-made thing of enduring value. And those aren't going away. They're still going to be a key component, but they're brought now into part of the Pmbok guide as to being the focus of the Pmbok guide. It's a supporting subset. And the models, you know, they're a thinking strategy, and the models help explain process framework or phenomena. By the way, this is a PMI phrase. Phenomenon I thought was kind of an interesting word, and I'm not going to go any more and say I think phenomenon is an interesting word for this. And the methods are the means for achieving an outcome, result, or deliverable. We've all been involved in methodologies for a long time, and actually PMI has made it quite clear over the years that the Pmbok guide was not a methodology, but was a framework. And PMI is changing that a little bit with embracing the disciplined agile and some of that. And then in here, we're going to be talking about performing domains a little bit later, which feel more like methods as opposed to anything else. Notice my phrasing there, feels more like. I'm not going to get into a deep intellectual discussion on whether they are or aren't. I'm just going to say that they're focusing them on that we're helping you with methods that span the old knowledge areas. The knowledge areas aren't going away, but we're looking at scheduling throughout the life cycle much more integrated than scheduling as just a knowledge area to focus your work on. And then the artifacts that I just talked about, templates, documents, outputs. And then there's going to be this third part called PMI Standards Plus, which is really the digital experience, moving a lot of knowledge into a structured, query-enabled environment to help you better understand these different components of the Pmbok guide and the standard, and also keep some of that history. I mean, if you're a huge fan of the previous procurement knowledge area within the Pmbok Guide 6.0, it's not going away. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be available. On to the next piece. We're also looking at the new structure within the PMP exam. And like I said, they're kind of interlaced, but I'm just going to hit here some of the high level of where this PMP exam is. And that was more process-oriented to this principles-oriented approach. I'm going to show the principles here in a little bit. And it supports any type of project delivery. That's probably the big asterisk here. We're not just define a huge WBS up front with every task. We now embrace some of the agile capabilities, definitely hybrid, which is a mixture of both. And I kind of come from the mindset that everything's a hybrid. We're using what's most applicable to that point in time. And actually, I'll digress for a second. That's one of the key concepts of disciplined agile, is whenever you have an iteration, you're really evaluating where we are. And so in the context of where I'm at, you try to decide what's my goal for my next iteration, and then what's my best tool in order to achieve that goal. And that's being embraced here as we go forward with some of these performance domains. And there are these 4 different types of projects I've already talked about a little bit. Iterative and incremental, I think I get into those as one of them is a fixed time block that every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, something will be delivered. The other, the incremental, is based more on functions. That it may take us, a certain amount of time, say in a change management process, it may take us a certain amount of time in order to develop some sort of communication to our users. And then there may be different training pieces. One may take 2 weeks, one may take 4 weeks, but they're increments in which it's delivered as opposed to a fixed time. We also show how strategy leads to intended business value, and strategy is still becoming a point. We're still going to have this concept of a clear line of sight between the strategic intent and the outcomes and deliveries of a project. A project is a means that an organization uses to deliver value, delivers outcomes and capabilities. Capabilities are functions, outcomes is the ability of the organization in order to utilize those functions. And here's a blurb from them that I'm not going to read to you. And by the way, Andy and I will make these slides available for you too, maybe as a PDF or whatever. I guess if you just ask us on the, you'll see an email at the end. We'll get them to you. Turns into business value produced by the organization. So we're going to show you how to take ideas, produce deliverables, and turn into value for the organization. And we also are supporting these PMP exam components, which is, again, a huge change. Within the new PMP world, they deal with domains, tasks, and enablers. And we'll talk about those a little bit more later. So let me give you kind of a table definition of what I just talked about. There's a Pmbok guide, which has the principles. There's a standard for project management, which has these models and frameworks and artifacts. Then there's approaches that look so you can take different ways, focusing on those outcomes, and that you can tailor your development approach and processes to the unique characteristics of the project. So within your PMO, not everything needs to be agile, not everything's going to be waterfall. We're going to do a mixture of both. And actually maybe even delivering the same product, we may do a mixture of both. And then finally, the Standards Plus is a digital solution for access to the guide, the how-to, and the embedded knowledge that PMI has acquired over the last many years. So let me give you an example of a principle. And this is from a draft of the Pmbok guide. By the way, if anybody's coming here for Frick, Dave will be able to tell you when the Pmbok guide will be available. I'm sorry, I will not be able to meet that expectation because I do not know. I know if you go to Amazon right at the moment and look up the Pmbok Guide 7, and they will say it's available May 1st. PMI has not delivered any date. There was talking about having it done in 2020. COVID happened, and there were several things that impacted that dramatically. And also when you're starting to deal with ANSI standards and the ISO standards, that drives a few things too. So everything I talk about here from the Pmbok is from a draft version. So one of the principles, focus on value, and it gives you a little definition of what value is. Value can be realized throughout the project. Value and the benefits contribute to value. Focus on outcomes allows teams to support the intended benefits, and project teams evaluate progress and adopt to ensure the expected value can be realized. A principle. We're not focused on wasting resources. We're not focused on developing things that nobody needs. We're focused on delivering value. And that drives back to the project manager. The skill set required to identify value and to be able to quantify and prioritize based on value, and to make sure the team can do that. So taking value to the next step, We talk about value-driven delivery, and here in this value system, anchored operations, if it's not out in operations available to the public, you don't really have anything to do. And notice some familiar terms here like portfolios, programs. Programs can just stand on their own. Individual projects can just be a part of the value delivery system. Not everything fits into a 3-tier hierarchy. And we look at what's the entire internal and external environments. Internal environments often consider things like infrastructure projects and stuff like that, things that you have to do to keep the lights on. And then external, of course, is driven by a multitude of external pieces. But the idea of value-driven delivery here at the core, and it's influenced by several different environments, and that we have to be supported by an operation on things moving forward. Now I'm going to step back for just a second and say there's a little bit of a exception there. Everything has an exception, right? When I was developing a class for the University of British Columbia, we did something regarding the Olympics in Vancouver. That's not your traditional project because that has a not just a firm start date, a unmovable start date and a definite end, and then it's done. So the sustainability in that is a little bit different. So transition to operations really wasn't as much a thing as the ongoing evolution of the project, which was implementing a bobsled run, which was an example, our case study, at the Olympics itself. The principles themselves, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Stewardship. So you're a good steward. You're given resources to be able to make sure that they're optimized. Team, that you're the one, the project manager is going to be responsible really to build this team culture, accountability, and respect. And all those associated emotional intelligent things in order to have people as active members of the team feel they are fulfilling a purpose and that they're not only adding value, but are recognized for adding value. Stakeholders, you're still going to have stakeholders. Stakeholders by name probably aren't going to be that different than traditional project management. However, the level of involvement and the oscillating in and out of different components of our projects will probably be changed as we go forward with the stakeholders. Value, we've already talked about that, so we focus on value. Holistic thinking, system thinking, but looking that it's not just an individual silo that we're working on, that we're part of a complex integrated systems of applications, people, networks, security requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So with that holistic thinking, we're aware of those different pieces as we deliver, and the guide starts to look at those things. Leadership sort of speaks for itself. I think influence is a very important word there. I think advisor is probably an important word that's left out at this point in time. But you're going to become more and more an influencer and an advisor. Tailoring, based on the context of where we're at, what's the best approach in order to meet our near-term goal? And then you're still going to be looking at rolling wave and goals beyond this one. You're going to be looking at current, next wave, the wave after that, or we can use the term iteration. The project manager is going to be expected to be able to make sure that the teams and organization are focused, the team mainly on delivering the current iteration, but impact the future iterations. It's going to become more and more in a planning role, continuous planning. Quality, it speaks for itself. Make sure it not only does what it's supposed to, delights our customers, and doesn't have problems. Complexity. I talked about complexity a little bit there earlier when I talked about the holistic thinking, but there's also a lot of technical complexities within the individual components of the project itself that we need you to be aware of. And we're going to be heavily, still the term expert judgment isn't going away. It's still there, which is a fancy way of saying your X number of years of experience, and not just as a project manager, but your life experience. Opportunities and threats. I think most of the people that are PMPs did something with SWOT analysis in the previous version. We're still going to be looking at, we just aren't using the whole term SWOT now from the PMI thing, but we're still looking at opportunities and threats. And then the adaptability and resilience. Adaptable means adjusting to change. Resilience means stick-to-itness. You know, that it's not going to be done overnight. Some things may take a very long time. And then finally, looking at change management as a separate component. I'm not talking necessarily about traditional change management in a project in which a requirement has been added or something like that, but dealing with change in the whole. What are the changes required by our user community to adapt this? What are the changes required by our executives to be able to understand this? What are changes to KPIs so we can measure the success? So these are the 12 principles right at the moment that are in the Pmbok 7.0 going forward. Significant change from process steps and kind of motherhood and apple pie type things. Yeah, we should all be adhering to it, but it's bringing it to the forefront as far as making sure everybody understands what these pieces are. Okay, I'm going on to the next part. Guess I'll pause there for just a second. I'm going to take a sip of my water so I don't completely dehydrate and start coughing on you. Let me go into the big change in my mind, and that is the idea of performance domains. We're not having processes. Instead, we're going to talk about performance domains and the group of related activities that are critical for the effective delivery of the outcomes. And I don't know how well you can see this. We'll have a brief slide on all of these. But planning at the performance domain is going to be constant throughout the project, regardless of your methodology. Delivering work. Hey, imagine that. We're actually talking about delivering something. That's a good idea. And then delivery. And delivery is going to get into the transition to operations piece and things like that. You know, and dealing with uncertainty. We'll get into these a little bit more. But the idea, these domains overlap and intersect throughout the projects. And I think intersect's a good word there. I might even use the term interleave as opposed to intersect. But they're not standalone domains. They are domains that have relationships. And based on your culture and the tailoring of your project, it may be much more integrated or much less integrated. And throughout the life of the project. So let's look at the stakeholder domain. And I'm not going to read these to you because you can read these. And the idea is the people that work on the project are impacted by the project, et cetera, that we have to engage with them. And that means getting their ideas, communicating, utilizing their knowledge to make sure we capture requirements or expectations, whatever term we want to use, and making sure that we're delivering an outcome that the organization can adapt to. And so we're going to promote productive involvement of stakeholders in project decision-making and implementation. In my Agile world and experience, it amazes me sometimes how difficult it can be to get stakeholders to come and look at a demo. We need to look, and we're looking here using emotional intelligence and other tools with stakeholders to get the level of involvement of these different pieces and encourage the project manager to use different tools and techniques. Team performance, activities, functions, but it's really making sure the members of the team feel valued, that they understand what they're delivering, that they're able to work with each other and have a safe environment where we can experiment. And there's buzzwords like fail fast and other stuff, but all those things are important, that we have an environment where the team's able to prosper as much as possible. A bunch of individuals performing work to achieve a team objective. I had the pleasure once of seeing Eugene Kranz speak. And if you don't know who Eugene Kranz was, he was the flight commander of Apollo 13, was his famous one, also Apollo 11 and several other Apollo missions. He had a great story when I saw him present. He talked about on the team that they all had the motto of check your ego at the door. And one of his techniques, somebody on this team, and he was dealing with rocket scientists, and he was dealing with brilliant people. And I mean, they used slide rules to calculate all this stuff, right? They didn't have formulas in an Excel to punch through a computer. But if somebody got out of hand, he had it set up in such a way, he would ask them to leave, go out, get a cup of coffee, come back and check your ego at the door. And that's all the more he said, and they did it. And that was a way, that was a method, but it was still focused on team. Check your ego at the door. And I like that as an analogy for where I think this performance domain goes. And also encourage people that may be a little bit more of an introvert. The development approach and life cycle. Again, what's the best tool or process in order to meet our current goal, this next iteration? And this looks at that whole way of development approaches, that it may make sense for a part of it to be heavy upfront planning, a la waterfall. And then once you get into this level of developing a product, you may go to more of an iterative hybrid approach, because you may not know what is the best first step to do. You may have to do spikes in order to even validate certain pieces. And so what spikes make the most sense? And if this spike is this result, it may drive our next decision, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at ways to set structure around those development approaches and the whole life cycle. It doesn't get a lot into, quote, scaling, unquote, but it sure does poke at it quite a bit. I think scaling, you're going to be seeing a lot more things happening with that. And as a side note, part of the disciplined Agile world is they're going to have a value stream scaling capability, where we look at things based on business increments and delivering value across multiple development efforts. I won't even use the term projects. But we're going to be looking at that more and more and fleshing out the best techniques, how to analyze some of these things, et cetera. But looking at that as a structured piece of our performing domains. Planning. And I don't know if I really need to even speak about planning too much, because I think I see most of the people here. I know a lot of you, and you've already been project managers for many years, so you understand where planning comes in. But I'm glad to see it as a domain, that it is a recognized skill that has different levels throughout the life of the project. And those of you that are project managers, have been so for many years, I'm sure you all have stories where you were planning the day before you went live, or maybe even after you went live, you were planning different things. But the idea of planning, these are steps that we need to do. This is the approach, and these are the accountable people in order to make these things happen. So we're now looking at that as a performance domain throughout the life cycle of the project. And they use some good terms here: elaborate, coordinate, and the amount, timing, and frequency vary depending on the product development, the approach, the environment, and the stakeholders. Next one is project work, and that's actually delivering the product and the activities, functions associated with that, and the managing of the resources. Do we have to share server space with somebody? With virtual machines, that's not as big an issue as it was 20 years ago. It's still an issue. More resource utilization, some of those things are going to be important components of this. And project work is associated with establishing the processes and performing the work to enable the team to deliver the expected value. And it does include some traditional, I'll say, knowledge areas with communication. This is where we're going to be looking at our risk mitigation and our risk evaluation, our procurements, to make sure that suppliers are delivering what they're expected, that we're processing any sort of invoices and et cetera properly, that we're filling out the paperwork in order to be able to meet the contract obligations or RFPs, et cetera, and keep the project running smoothly, and adapting the work based on the planning outcomes, et cetera. Then delivery, performance domain addresses transition to operations, delivering the scope and what's there, making sure the expectations are set and that you deliver what aligns with the expectations that you set. And I think the term transition to operations is important, because everything, not everything, but most of the projects we deliver, the product is going to have some sort of impact on existing metrics, be they KPIs or whatever you want to have, to measure the health of the organization. And you need to be able to make sure, as this is transition, that people understand what the impact is to the KPI, both the data is collected, the measurement, and perhaps the expectations of the measurements, benefits and owners, and some of that stuff. So delivery is really a transition from development to operations. I'm not going to get into DevOps at this point in time, but clearly if you're in a DevOps environment, this performing domain is going to be very significant. Measurement, I just talked about that before, but that makes sure that as we deliver it, that the measurement things are in there to measure what the business sees as value. And also measure your project performance. When we're in a quote agile unquote world, if you're in Scrum and you measure velocity of your team in order to complete story points at a certain particular rate, we're going to be factoring that into our project standards, that we are coming up with different ways and means in order to measure that we're developing the right thing, that we're doing it in the most expedient time frame, that we're focused on value, we're doing it lean and delivering items that are low on waste and reduce time in queue between different handoffs. So in order to achieve those and be able to demonstrate that we've succeeded at that, we're going to put in measurement pieces. Now here we get into uncertainty. One of the things that I've always liked in the Agile ACP world is the cone of uncertainty. It kind of reminds me of the old Get Smart and the cone of silence. But we have this big cone of uncertainty, and really the project manager, one of their main jobs throughout the life cycle is reduce the uncertainty so we have a better idea of the certainty of what we're delivering. And that's why we do things like spikes or small prototypes or whatever terms we want to use. But the project manager now has a set of approaches and tools and agreed to standards in order to help reduce the uncertainty of the deliverable of the project environment. There can be all sorts of things we'll talk about. You know, they say uncertainty in the broadest sense is a state of not knowing or unpredictability. So I think there's going to be different levels based on the complexity of the project and some of that stuff. But still, it's helping to embrace the uncertainty, maybe identify it, even personify it so you know what we're attacking, and to be able to communicate how we're dealing with uncertainty. So those are the 8 performance domains. Significantly different than what we've covered in the past with procurement, risk management, schedule, knowledge areas, the 10 knowledge areas. And we're getting much more to a point of, as I said, performance, being able to deliver using those things in 8 different intersecting performance domains. Now let me get into the digital experience. And it's an initiative called Standards Plus. Full disclosure, I am part of the Standards Plus team, so I'm fairly familiar with what's happening here in Standards Plus. And it's going to be a combination of digitizing a lot of the information from past Pmbok guides, the knowledge areas, the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques. They had good knowledge here. There were good things there, but we've maybe evolved past those a little bit. So this digitizing is to be able, as they say here, expand the breadth of tools for models, methods, and artifacts. And it's going to be giving you more along the lines of practical case studies and ways to implement these tools. The plus adds value. Got to put in a little marketing, I guess. And that's the standards and guides just the beginning, and his exclusive access to how-to articles. By the way, this little screen here on this side is an example of an output from a query into the Standards Plus. And it does provide you collateral. You can get templates downloaded from this. It's using a lot of different media. There's a lot of things that are video. I think we're going to be seeing some more and more interactiveness and maybe even some Miro boards or other tools like that that can be able to plug in to industry's leading standardization software. And the last bullet point is from the PMI information on this one. I do work with the standards for us. It'll help you thrive on each project and in your career. I like the idea of it just being the digital experience and access a huge knowledge base. You don't have to flip through a bunch of books to find something. And it's not necessarily a Google thing. Instead, you're looking for something with the PMI Good Housekeeping stamp of approval. This is a view if you go into Standards Plus. By the way, you can go to Standards Plus now. You need to register. It's a separate registration, but it's standardsplus.pmi.org. I just put it in the /home because I just copied and pasted the URL. I'm going to go into these 4 different categories in a little bit, but you're able to select this and filter so you can get back something. If you're looking for something that's adaptive in consulting and you're looking for a case study, you can click those 3 boxes and it'll bring that back. So let me get into these different pieces. Approach, there's really 3 at the moment: adaptive, hybrid, waterfall. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I just kind of wanted to break out because that was one big slide and not necessarily the largest font. Get you an idea of the current level of thinking. Industry, this is a list right now that PMI has with industries, but as we all know, it's subject to grow. It probably will. You notice that there's some, like information technology probably spans all these different types of industries, but there are a lot of specific things for IT. So they broke that out as its own quote industry. Same with education, consulting, but like healthcare, which is one of the choices here, probably a little bit more focused on lots of different things besides the information technology piece. You know, there's lots of things in healthcare with patient health information being secure, transportation between hospitals, the entire suite of compliance regulations, et cetera, et cetera. Next one, different types of formats. Right now they're offering case studies, audio, standards and guides. The Agile Practice Guide is in there. It's where it'll go out and search standard guide, including past Pmbok guides. Right now they only have the 6th edition up as far as in the past. When the 7th one becomes available, it'll be searchable through here and templates and videos. And they are currently soliciting people for case studies, and they're having a group, they've outsourced to quote some technical writers to be able to help jumpstart getting good case studies. And then this one, the topics, and that's huge. You can look at these different things, and I'm not going to read this to you again. But as you can see, there's actually, I think, 38 different topics at this point in time. But again, this is a way to try to help you narrow down your inquiry. So if you want to do something on hybrid, focus exclusively on risk management in the healthcare industry, you can do that. And so that's where it becomes a searchable digital repository. And it has some of the things, the Pmbok, this is a query that I did, and it does bring back, something from the Agile Practice Guide. It was on change. And so likelihood of change, you can get more information, less information. You can actually click a hot link right to the standards page or the standards section that talks about it. And then here, this does have a video that you'll be able to use. So it's going out to some different things from just this query. Oh, sorry about that. It's talking to the Pmbok guide, the standards guide, and the Agile Practice Guide. And another one going forward, a different screenshot. This is if I'm looking for something to do with a project management plan. Again, it's coming from this Pmbok 6th edition. It gives me initially kind of a header here so I can decide if I want to find out more, and then I'll have an option to be able to look at more or look at less. And then I can share it or save it, or if I think it's missing something, I can provide feedback. So Standards Plus is going to be a digital query or filtering system to be able to hone in on knowledge. So that's pretty much it on the Pmbok7. I'm now going to go into a little bit of how Pmbok7 is just a piece of the overall transformation at PMI. And I'm going to start by looking at before January 1st of 2021, how the PMI exam looked. Remember these domains: initiating, planning, executing, monitor, controlling, closing. By the way, I don't know how many of you remember now. PMI has never said that the PMP exam is based off the Pmbok guide. It's always been based off the testing domains. And this was the breakout of the different percentages for the exam before the exam changed year. And by the way, that exam went through a couple different start stops and a fairly significant pilot program, and et cetera. Full disclosure, my daughter was actually involved in the PMP pilot exam that she took last year, and had some interesting conversations with her on it. The one I remember most is, Maggie, there's a big chunk of Agile in this, right? She said, yeah, quite a bit. What type of Agile did they focus on? Look and see if it's going to be Scrum or just Agile principles or perhaps Kanban or something. She said, Dad, I think it was mostly ambiguous Agile. And I kind of like that definition. We got Agile things, but we're not going to pin ourselves down to a particular process or methodology. So with that, the exam went away. The new year, we now have the content outline broken out into people, process, and business environment. And as you can see, a big chunks, people and process make up 92%, and then business environment is going to be 8%. And half the examination will represent predictive project management, and the other half will represent agile or hybrid approaches. And from what I understand, the people's going to be, a lot of those are both of them. So the dealing with people are going to still be the same, whether you're in a predictive environment or an agile or hybrid environment. And so you're going to see these different approaches that we've talked about from way back in the beginning throughout the exam. And then they have a new flow. If you remember back before, we had the planning, initiation, et cetera. The new flow is going to be dealing with a high-performing team and then starting the project. I think it's kind of interesting that they're building the team for starting the project. If you remember in the past, we always had to have a charter before we could build a team. Now we're starting a project, then doing the work, keeping the team on track, which is similar to monitor controlling, but it gets more into the controlling piece on how to take corrective action. And then finally, keeping the business in mind. So notice now the PMP exam is sort of lining up with some things we talked about with Pmbok Guide 7. And you'll be seeing more and more of that as these standards are rolled out. I talked before about the domains there. They actually break out the domains into tasks and then what they call enablers. Now, I'm just only going to show one slide of this, and actually I have a little bit later on. We are going to, through Project Management Gorillas, are going to be offering a webinar like this on the exam. They use the term exam content outline. So we're going to be doing some sharing with you on that as we offer more and more things on the PMP domain. We're also going to be offering classes on the PMP exam. But the idea here is you have these tasks, and then you have enablers that support the tasks that fall within the domain. And I think in people, I think there's like 16 tasks, and in the next one process, I think there's 18, but then under the business, there's only like 4 tasks. I don't have these numbers memorized, so please don't write them down and say, Dave, it's only 12, not 14. But this gives you an idea of the structure. So the structure of the PMP is, again, congruent with the structure of the Pmbok guide, and working on those, managing forward on this idea of people, process, and business. I'd mentioned something before about events that Gorilla Project Management does, and we have something, hopefully get it out there by next week, called go to our Guerrilla Project Management site. You can join us, follow us on LinkedIn or join the site or whatever. They'll get you event information to register. But we're kind of looking at the PMP and how it's pulling together with the different types of approaches as we've talked about before, and how they're going to be looking at within the PMP exam. And remember the PMP exam right at the moment is at Pmbok 6.0, but there are a lot of components of Pmbok 7 that are already in the Pmbok 6.0 exam or the PMP exam. So I see that being more of an evolution as opposed to a revolution from the current exam to Pmbok 7 exam. Why I see Pmbok 6 to Pmbok 7 as talked about here. It's a gateway to a new way of PMI's approach to delivering value through projects and programs. And as I also have here, we have a PMP boot camp that's coming up in April, and you can get more information on that. We're working with the PMI Central Ohio chapter, and they will actually be offering a discount for everybody in order to take this boot camp exam or this boot camp class in April. So thanks to the PMI Central Ohio chapter for being able to make, say, a benefit available to anybody within, well, anybody. You don't even have to be a PMI person, I think, in order to make this happen. I'm just really happy that the Central Ohio chapters looking at getting this message out and helping people to embrace the new exam. So Andy, I don't know, do you have anything you wanted to inject here, or are you going to wait till the end?
No, I don't. We probably could get to some Q&A though, if there is any.
Well, I got a few more slides, then we'll get to the Q&A.
All righty.
There's another thing happening, and it's micro-certification. Some popped up this thing that I am now part of the Agile Hybrid Project Pro, a micro credential, and full confession, I have this credential. And the idea of the micro certification, I am really in favor of, achieving just specific skills and constantly by focusing on some unique subjects. And the three they have going right at the moment are Agile Hybrid, Organizational Transformation or Change Management, then something called Citizen Developer. I'm not even going to go into Citizen Developer, but that's really a new way of thinking. But it's a bridge between the PMP and a specialized skill without a full-fledged certification. So if you're interested in being able to demonstrate you have an idea of Agile and the hybrid part, and you've been a PMP for many years, you don't have to go out and get the full-fledged ACP certification. You can do this hybrid micro certification and be able to bridge it. You have the level of knowledge to be able to converse fluently and understand the concepts. So I like the idea where that's going, and I think we'll be seeing more and more things on micro certifications as you advance your careers. And then so to summarize, the Pmbok Guide 7th edition, it's the next edition, outcomes in addition to deliverables. Tailoring, a lot of work on tailoring. We're currently in final draft. Somewhere in 2021, my guess is it'll happen before whatever they do for a global conference in October, because they're going to want to have the announcement at the global conference that this is available. Amazon says May 1st. I would not put a lot of credence in that. And as soon as we get the date, PMI will do that through their normal communication channels. And then there's actually a link to resources and everything else on the Pmbok Guide 7, which is pmi.org. So thank you for spending time here and listening to me. We'll take some questions and whatever, but I hope you get a feel for, as I said, the new era of where PMI is trying to focus a set of tools, standards, principles in order to help you better deliver value for your customers in whatever means makes the most sense at the time. So like Andy said, we'll open up for questions. I think we can also just open the mic so you can type something in chat. Or Andy, if there's anything you need to add.
I think so. You can come off mute and ask any questions you like. And as Dave mentioned, we're doing a follow-up to this particular session. Next week, we're going to go through the exam content outline and the life cycle that Dave showed on the screen in a little bit more detail. And it will be a great preparation for anybody that's interested in sitting for the PMP or refreshing their PMP that they have right now.
Yeah, and actually I'll throw out something there too that we've kind of talked about, just kind of a refresher possibility, opportunity for people that are existing PMPs, but just want to refresh on what this means without having to, oh, you can't sit for the exam again. I mean, once you're a PMP, you can't take the exam over. So there may be some opportunities there.
So we have a question from Ms. Prince, and we will post this video on our website. And if you go ahead and take the survey, we'll also post your PDUs to PMI if you need them. If you're a certificate holder, that might be very useful. And I'll just put the information on the screen again.
Yeah. And my email's here. If anybody quickly wants a copy of the presentation, just shoot me an email.
And we'll go ahead and post that on the website as well.
Or that too. I mean, we'll make it available to you.
Yep. We certainly will, because we're committed to getting this all out and having a revolution. We think there's better project management to be done.
Yes, and I like the idea of infinite flow, and it, you know, we're on the cusp of a whole new way of delivering outcomes and capabilities.
And we're seeing it everywhere. It's not a brand new concept. The early adopters are already in infinite flow, and it's coming quickly. So it's going to be a great decade to be a project manager. Very exciting.
Yeah, and also seeing attention to a lot more quote work streams, unquote, in projects. It's not just going to be focused on the tasks to deliver the product. That you're going to be much more holistic. Change management is going to be a part of it. Security is going to be a huge part of it. Both physical and virtual security, cyber security, whatever term we want to use.
Well, Dave, I'd like to say thank you very much. It was a great presentation, as always. And thank you to everybody who spent an hour with us. We appreciate your investment of time and treasure. And hope you can be with us next week. And we'll continue this series. There's so much to talk about with PMP 2021 and so much to talk about with the PMI transformation. And I think the best indicator of that is all of the really interesting YouTube videos with very, very passionate people going one direction or the other about some of the changes that Dave has talked about tonight. So there's a lot of excitement in project management. And with that said, I guess we'll go ahead and end the call. And this, as I said, this video will be available on our website tomorrow.